When a relationship ends, that is supposed to be it. Two people go their separate ways. They build new lives, meet new people, and move forward. That is how it is supposed to work. That is what every reasonable person understands when something comes to an end. But for the victims in these cases, moving on was the most dangerous thing they ever did. The moment they started a new relationship, introduced a new person into their lives, or simply walked out their front door to go somewhere with someone new, the person they had left decided that was not acceptable, and they did something about it. These were not crimes between strangers. They were not random acts of violence. They were deliberate, targeted attacks, carried out by people who had once been trusted, once been loved, and could not survive the idea of being replaced. Today we are covering 10 exes who killed the new partner instead. What you are about to hear will make you think very differently about what it actually means to move on. Zachariah Anderson. In February 2020, Sadie Beecham ended her long-term relationship with Zachariah Anderson. The two had been together for years and shared 3 children. Anderson moved out. Beecham moved on. She met a man named Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. online, and by early 2020, the two had started dating. Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. was 40 years old. He had grown up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, earned degrees in criminal justice and sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Parkside, and went on to work at the State Public Defender's Office. His family described him as a mama's boy who would drop everything to help a friend. People who knew him said he was the kind of person you could call at any hour and he would show up. He had 2 children of his own, and his family described him as loving and present in their lives. On May 19, 2020, Rosalio was reported missing after he failed to show up for work for 2 days. When Kenosha police went to his apartment to check on him, they found large amounts of what appeared to be fresh blood covering the floor and furniture. Rosalio was gone. His body has never been found. What police found next pointed directly at Zachariah Anderson, and what came out at trial was worse than most people expected. Zachariah Anderson had been with Sadie Beecham for years before she ended things in February 2020. After the breakup, he did not accept it. He began contacting her constantly, texting at all hours of the night, emailing repeatedly, showing up with flowers. Beecham later testified that it felt less like affection and more like harassment. She told the court he was relentless, that the volume and frequency of his attempts to reach her were not the behavior of someone who had accepted that a relationship was over. When she started seeing Rosalio, Anderson's behavior got worse. He made it clear he did not approve of the relationship. He wanted Beecham back, and he told her so repeatedly. When that did not work, he started watching them. Anderson lived in Mequon, Wisconsin, about an hour's drive from Kenosha. Investigators later found a folder on his laptop that had been assembled with deliberate purpose. It contained photographs of Rosalio, screenshots of information about him, photos of his business card, and his home address. Anderson had also used his devices to look up driving directions to Rosalio's apartment in the days before Rosalio disappeared. Cell phone data placed Anderson in Kenosha on multiple occasions in the weeks leading up to May 2020. He was not in Kenosha for work. He was not passing through. He was making specific trips to a city an hour away to be near 2 people who did not know he was there. He did not stop at digital surveillance. In April 2020, less than a month before Rosalio vanished, Anderson drove his teenage daughter to Beecham's home at night. He parked nearby, and the 2 of them sat and watched the house through the window. His daughter later testified about this in court. She also testified that her father had gone through Rosalio's truck on a separate occasion, photographed the license plate and the vehicle registration, and then rang the doorbell and fled before anyone answered. She said Anderson told her he might follow Rosalio to his house one day, just to see where he went. During that conversation, she said, he referred to Rosalio using a racial slur. Anderson had also planted a burner phone inside Beecham's car. The device allowed him to track her movements in real time without her knowledge. Beecham eventually found it. She knew immediately who had put it there. Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. was last seen or heard from on May 17, 2020. 2 days later, his family and co-workers reported him missing after he failed to show up for work and could not be reached. Kenosha police conducted the welfare check at his apartment on Mason Drive and found the blood. There was a significant amount of it. Blood on the floor, blood on the furniture, blood spatter on his children's drawings, and on family photographs that were hanging on the walls of his apartment. The blood appeared fresh. Rosalio was not there. No one has seen him since. Rosalio's body has never been found. The morning after Rosalio was last seen alive, May 18, 2020, Anderson was captured on surveillance footage walking into a local Walmart in his area. He bought garbage bags, latex gloves, and bleach wipes. He also purchased 2 cans of sardines. When police later searched his Dodge minivan, the interior smelled strongly of bleach. Sections of the interior carpet had been removed. Rosalio's DNA was found inside the van. Investigators also found a burn pit at Anderson's residential property and a separate burn pit at a farm he had access to. Both were still smouldering when officers arrived. In the ashes, they recovered the remains of a bleach bottle and clothing that belonged to Anderson. The 2 opened and uneaten cans of sardines were found under the front passenger seat of the van. Anderson was taken into custody on May 19, 2020, the same day Kenosha police discovered the blood at Rosalio's apartment. He was arrested at his home in Mequon and charged. From the moment of his arrest, he maintained that he had nothing to do with Rosalio's disappearance. He kept that position through 2 trials. The first trial ended in a mistrial in 2022. During the defense's opening statements, something was said that prompted the prosecution to move for a mistrial, and the judge granted it. The case had to start over. By the time the second trial began in February 2023, Anderson was 41 years old. Rosalio had been missing for nearly 3 years. His family still did not know where he was. His children were growing up without answers. The second trial lasted 3 weeks and was held in Kenosha County Circuit Court. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jessica Krejkarek and District Attorney Michael Gravely, laid out the case piece by piece. The evidence included the DNA recovered from Anderson's van, the bleach and removed carpet, the burn pits and their contents, the laptop folder assembled with Rosalio's photos and personal information, the cell phone data placing Anderson in Kenosha before the murder, the burner phone he had planted in Beecham's car, and the Walmart surveillance footage from the morning after Rosalio was last seen alive. Sadie Beecham took the stand and testified about Anderson's behavior in the months following the breakup. She described the constant messages, the flowers he kept bringing, his refusal to accept that the relationship was over, and the fear she felt when she discovered the tracking device in her car. She told the court about his obsessive focus on her new relationship with Rosalio, and about how his behavior had escalated after she made clear she was not coming back. Anderson's own teenage daughter then took the stand. She was 14 years old during the second trial. She described being used by her father as a lookout, sitting outside Beecham's house at night to watch what was happening inside. She told the court about the night her father went through Rosalio's truck, took photos of the license plate and registration, rang the doorbell, and ran. She testified about her father telling her he might follow Rosalio one day, just to see where he lived. She recounted the racial slur he used when referring to Rosalio. At one point during her testimony, prosecutors accused Anderson of attempting to signal his daughter from the defendant's table. They said he had put his hand to his mouth and clamped his lips shut while staring at her on the stand, a gesture they interpreted as telling her to stop talking. The judge addressed the incident in front of the jury. Anderson's daughter continued her testimony. District Attorney Michael Gravely focused in his closing argument on what he described as Anderson's overwhelming, out-of-control, limitless jealousy. He asked the jury to look past the absence of a body and focus on what the evidence did show: the tracking, the surveillance, the DNA, the bleach, the burn pits, the Walmart trip the morning after. The defense, led by attorney Nicole Muller, built its entire case around the absence of Rosalio's body. She raised it in her opening statement and returned to it throughout the trial. Without a body, she argued, there was no confirmed cause of death. Without a confirmed cause of death, the state could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Rosalio was dead, let alone that Anderson had killed him. She pointed out that no witness had placed Anderson at Rosalio's apartment on May 17th or 18th, 2020. She noted that when Anderson was arrested, his clothing showed no obvious stains. She argued the state had built a circumstantial case around a man it had decided was guilty and had failed to look at any other potential explanation for what had happened. The jury deliberated for nearly 10 hours across 2 sessions. On March 22, 2023, they returned to the courtroom and delivered their verdict. Guilty on all 4 counts: first-degree intentional homicide, hiding a corpse, stalking Sadie Beecham, stalking Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. 7 women and 5 men had considered all of it, no body, no eyewitnesses, no confession, and decided beyond a reasonable doubt that Zachariah Anderson had killed Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. and hidden what remained of him. When the verdict was read, Anderson stood without expression. He barely moved. Beecham, sitting in the gallery, cupped her hand over her face and sobbed as the counts were read out one by one. Rosalio's family, who had filled the courtroom throughout the 3 weeks of testimony, finally had an answer. It did not bring him back. It did not tell them where he was, but it told them, officially, what they had already known. Kenosha County Assistant District Attorney Jessica Craig-Carrick spoke outside the courthouse after the verdict. She said it was a testament to good winning out over evil, and to the jury's ability to look past the fact that they still did not know where Rosalio was. She acknowledged the weight of convicting someone of murder without a body, and said the jury had done exactly what the law required them to do: evaluate the evidence that existed, not just the evidence that was missing. Sentencing was held on May 16, 2023, before Kenosha County Circuit Court Judge Bruce Schroeder, the longest-serving judge in Wisconsin at the time, who had also presided over the high-profile Kyle Rittenhouse trial in the same county. Before delivering the sentence, Judge Schroeder gave a lengthy address about the meaning of a life sentence under Wisconsin state law, walking through the legislative and judicial history of how parole had been applied over the decades he had been on the bench. Then the victims spoke. Rosalio's mother, Celia Patterson, addressed the court first. She said her son's blood had been found all over his apartment, spattered on the drawings his children had made, and on the family photographs hanging on his walls. She said he had been a kind and compassionate man, a good son, someone full of life who was loving to his family, his children, and his friends. She said he had been taken savagely, and she said the loss was beyond measure. His son Julian spoke next. He said he had begun to feel hatred toward Anderson and wanted his father to haunt him forever. Kayla Petty, the mother of Rosalio's first child, told the court that 3 years earlier, Anderson had taken a life, and that she had never imagined that would be her life. She said she wished Anderson a life in prison and hoped it haunted him, and she said she prayed that one day he would own up to what he had done. Sadie Beecham gave her own statement. She apologized to her daughter and to Rosalio's family for the void that had been left behind. She said through tears that she had never imagined this would be her life either. As her mascara ran down her face, she said she was eternally grateful for the support of friends, family, and strangers she had never met, and that their support had given her the strength to get through it. Anderson was given the opportunity to speak before sentencing. He used it the same way he had used every previous opportunity, to say he was innocent. He told the court he did not kill anybody, did not stalk anybody, and did not dispose of a corpse. He shook his head as Judge Schroeder spoke. The judge looked at him and said what you did was frightening and horrible, and the jury found beyond a reasonable doubt that you did it. Judge Schroeder sentenced Anderson to life in prison for the first-degree intentional homicide conviction, with the possibility of supervised release after serving 40 years. He received 6 years for hiding a corpse, and additional consecutive years for each of the 2 stalking convictions. He was credited with the 1,092 days he had already spent in custody since his May 2020 arrest. Zachariah Anderson is currently incarcerated in a Wisconsin correctional facility. He will be in his 80s before he is first eligible to ask for supervised release. He has filed a lawsuit against the city of Mequon, seeking $10 million in damages, claiming his 2020 arrest was wrongful and that the warrant used to detain him contained false information. The city has moved to disallow the claim. Rosalio Gutierrez Jr. has been missing for more than 5 years. His family does not know where his body is. His mother knows that his blood was found on his children's drawings. His son Julian grew up knowing his father is never coming home, and knowing who is responsible. What none of them know And what Zachariah Anderson has chosen, through his continued silence, to keep from them, is where Rosalio is. That answer went into a Wisconsin prison in May 2023 and has not come out. While Anderson destroyed a family from a distance, planning and tracking and waiting across weeks of surveillance before acting, the next case we are covering is about a man who did it face to face, at a custody handoff, in a driveway, in front of his own children, on his ex-wife's birthday. ___0___. While Anderson destroyed a family from a distance, planning and tracking and waiting, the next case we are covering is about a man who did it face to face, at a custody handoff, in a driveway, in front of his own children. Cristobal Palacio. In October 2008, a man named Cristobal Palacio shot and killed his ex-wife's husband in the driveway of his own home in Kendall, Florida. The victim was unarmed. The shooting happened in front of Palacio's 6-year-old twin daughters. His ex-wife watched it happen from a few feet away. It was her birthday. The man he killed was Paul Winter. Paul was 42 years old, originally from Tunbridge Wells, England. He had moved to Miami in 2007 after meeting Jennifer, Palacio's ex-wife, through an internet gaming website in November 2006. He was a graphic designer and a single father. By all accounts, he was a quiet man who tried to avoid conflict. Palacio was convicted of second-degree murder in August 2012 and sentenced to 45 years in prison the following October. He is currently incarcerated at Charlotte Correctional Institution in Punta Gorda, Florida, and will not be eligible for release until 2053. The road from a bitter divorce to a driveway shooting took about 2 years. What happened along the way says a great deal about who Cristobal Palacio was long before he pulled that trigger. Cristobal Palacio and Jennifer had been married for years before she decided to leave. On the stand during his murder trial, Jennifer described the marriage as abusive and controlling. She said Palacio was not a man who let things go easily, and the divorce confirmed that. The split was acrimonious, contested, drawn out, and bitter on Palacio's side. Jennifer was awarded custody of their twin daughters. The divorce was finalised in 2007. 3 days after it was finalised, Jennifer married Paul Winter, the man she had met online while still in the marriage. That timing mattered to Palacio a great deal. Paul Winter was not from Florida, did not know Palacio before all of this, and had no prior conflict with him. He was simply the man Jennifer had chosen after the marriage ended. But to Palacio, Paul's existence was personal. Jennifer testified at trial that Palacio had a history of making threats, that arguments during custody visits were common, and that Paul had allegedly been threatened by Palacio on prior occasions. Paul, she said, had told Palacio he had a gun at least twice before the 2008 incident. Palacio would later use this in court as part of his self-defense claim. What the prosecution pointed out was that Paul Winter never owned a gun. Court-ordered custody visits between Palacio and his daughters were a recurring flashpoint. Jennifer described the handoffs as tense. The couple would drive to Palacio's Kendall home to drop off or pick up the girls, and it rarely went smoothly. There had been arguments. There had been threats. Jennifer testified she had been aware things could turn dangerous, but she had no specific reason to believe that October evening would be different from the others. On the evening of October 16th, 2008, Jennifer's birthday, she and Paul drove to Palacio's home to drop off the twins for a court-ordered visit. The girls were 6 years old. They were in the car with their mother and stepfather when they arrived at Palacio's Kendall driveway. What happened next took only seconds. According to Jennifer's testimony, when Palacio came out of the house and saw Paul, something shifted in his face. She testified that he looked like he had won the lottery. He smiled. Then he picked up a gun and opened fire. Paul Winter was shot 6 times. 2 of the bullets struck him in the back. Jennifer watched her husband fall. She then watched Palacio walk up to Paul's body while he was already face down on the ground and shoot him again in the back. She said she screamed for help and tried to perform CPR on him. Paul Winter died at the scene. The twins witnessed the shooting from inside the car. They were 6 years old. Miami-Dade police responded and Palacio was taken into custody. He was charged with first-degree murder. In the days following the arrest, Palacio's legal team moved to have the case dismissed under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. arguing that Palacio had fired in self-defense because he believed Paul was reaching for a weapon. The judge rejected that motion, and the case went to trial in July 2012, nearly 4 years after the shooting. The prosecution's case rested on 3 main pillars. First, Jennifer's eyewitness testimony. Second, the physical evidence. Paul had been shot in the back twice, which contradicted the claim that he was advancing on Palacio. Third, and perhaps most devastatingly, the testimony of Palacio's own daughter. Palacio's daughter was 10 years old by the time she took the stand. She had been 6 at the time of the shooting and had watched it from the van. She testified that she saw her father shoot Paul. She heard the gunfire. She heard it fire more than once. She described seeing Paul fall. She also testified that in the lead-up to the trial, her father had told her to lie, specifically to say that Paul had been abusive toward her, which she said was not true. She stood by her account under cross-examination. Jennifer also testified under cross-examination. Palacio's defense attorney questioned why she had stayed in the driveway with the children if she knew Palacio was upset and capable of violence. Her answer was direct. She said that if she had known her husband was going to be murdered that day, she would have left. Hindsight, she said, is 20/20. Palacio testified in his own defense on the final day of the trial. He told the jury that Paul had threatened him in the past, and that he carried the gun for his own protection. He said he genuinely believed Paul was reaching for a weapon when he fired. He denied that he had planned to shoot Paul. He denied that he had wanted to hurt anyone. He got emotional on the stand, and his attorney asked him directly whether he felt joy that Paul was dead. Palacio said no. The jury deliberated for nearly 20 hours across 2 days. They came back with a verdict of second-degree murder, a lesser charge than the first-degree murder Palacio had originally been charged with. They also found him guilty on 2 counts of child abuse, because the crime had been committed in the presence of his twin daughters. When the verdict was read, Palacio did not react. He looked straight ahead and blinked. His defense attorney described him as being in shock. Sentencing took place in October 2012 before a Miami-Dade judge. The prosecution asked for life in prison without the possibility of parole. Palacio's family made an emotional plea for leniency. His father spoke through an interpreter and asked the court to consider that his son wanted to be the best person he could be. The judge sentenced Palacio to 45 years in prison, with 30 of those years mandatory, meaning he would have to serve them in full before any other considerations applied. He received an additional 10 years on the child abuse charges to be served concurrently with the murder sentence. A victim impact statement was read in court on behalf of Paul Winter's family. It said in part that on the day Palacio pulled that trigger, he did not only murder Paul, he also destroyed a part of his son's life. Paul Winter had a son from a previous relationship, and that child grew up without his father because of what happened in that driveway. Jennifer Winter spoke to the press after the sentencing. She said she was happy with the outcome, but described feeling numb. She had expected to feel relief or a sense of justice, she said. Instead, she felt nothing she could name. Cristobal Palacio has been at Charlotte Correctional Institution in Punta Gorda, Florida, since his conviction. Under the terms of his sentence, he will be eligible for release in 2053. He will be in his late 80s. Paul Winter was 42 years old and had moved across the ocean to build a life with someone he met through a game. He was unarmed in a driveway on his wife's birthday. He was shot 6 times, twice in the back after he was already on the ground, while his stepdaughters watched from a car. His daughter testified against the man who killed him. She was 10 years old when she sat in that courtroom and told the truth about what she saw. Palacio's case came down to a driveway, a custody visit, and a man who had decided that the rules of a divorce did not apply to him. The next case we are covering involves another custody exchange that turned deadly, but this time the killer was not the ex. He was the new boyfriend, lying in wait while the father showed up to collect his children. Chavez, Riyles. On March 10, 2018, a man named Daniel Wise drove to his ex-girlfriend's home in Lithonia, Georgia, to pick up 2 of his 3 children. He had brought a co-worker with him, a man named Robbie Johnson. The children were placed in the back seat of the car. Then Daniel got into an argument with his ex-girlfriend, Regina Welch, on the street outside her home. He never made it out of that argument alive. Chavez Riyles was 41 years old. He was Regina Welch's new boyfriend. He had positioned himself nearby before Daniel arrived, and he watched the argument unfold. Then he walked up behind Daniel Wise and struck him in the head with a gun. While Daniel was already bleeding from the blow, Riyles fired his weapon 13 times, hitting Daniel 8 times. Daniel's children were in the back seat of the car a few feet away. His co-worker, Robbie Johnson, was in the front seat. Riyles then turned the gun on the vehicle and shot Johnson in the spine. Daniel Wise managed to get back into the car. He drove a short distance before losing consciousness and crashing. He died from his injuries. Chavez Riyles was convicted of murder in October 2019 and sentenced to life in prison plus 65 years. Daniel Wise was 31 years old. He was the father of 3 children, a 9-year-old son, a 7-year-old daughter, and a 4-year-old son. He had been in a prior relationship with Regina Welch, and together they shared those 3 kids. The relationship had ended, and custody arrangements were in place. Daniel was actively involved in his children's lives. On March 10, 2018, he drove to Welch's Hupp Road home in Lithonia, specifically to pick up 2 of the 3 children for a scheduled visit. He brought his co-worker Robbie Johnson along for the ride. Johnson was 29 years old at the time. Regina Welch had moved on after her relationship with Daniel ended. She was now with Chavez Riyles. Riyles was 41 years old and lived in Lithonia. He had a prior felony conviction on his record, a fact that would become relevant during sentencing. Beyond that, the public record does not detail a long documented history between Riyles and Daniel before that day. What is clear from the prosecution's case and the evidence presented at trial is that Riyles had decided, at some point before Daniel arrived, that he was not going to let that custody exchange happen without inserting himself into it. On the afternoon of March 10, 2018, Daniel Wise arrived at the Hupp Road home. He put 2 of his 3 children into the back seat of his car, then he and Regina Welch got into an argument outside the vehicle. The nature of that argument, what it was about, who said what, is not fully detailed in the public record of the case. What is documented is that while the argument was happening, Chavez Riyles was watching from a nearby position, out of direct sight. Riyles moved toward Daniel from behind. He struck Daniel in the head with the gun first, a blow that left Daniel bleeding before a single shot was fired. Then Riyles opened fire. He pulled the trigger 13 times. 8 of those rounds hit Daniel Wise. Robbie Johnson, sitting in the front passenger seat, heard the shots. He looked back. Riyles turned the gun toward the car. Johnson made a decision in that moment that likely saved the lives of the 2 children in the back seat. He wedged himself between the 2 front seats, using his own body as a shield. He was shot in the spine. He survived. Daniel Wise, shot 8 times, somehow got back into the car. He drove away from the scene. He made it a short distance before losing consciousness. The car crashed. Daniel was transported to a hospital but did not survive his injuries. He died from multiple gunshot wounds. DeKalb County Police Lieutenant Lonzy Robertson was among the first law enforcement to respond. Daniel's friend Robbie Johnson was identified as a second shooting victim and was transported to hospital, where he remained in stable condition. Chavez Riyles fled the scene immediately after the shooting. Police identified him quickly. He was named in warrants for murder and aggravated assault. For 3 days he was a wanted man. On March 13, 2018, 3 days after the shooting, Riyles turned himself in to the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office Fugitive Unit. He was booked into the DeKalb County Jail on charges of felony murder and aggravated assault. As the case moved through the court system, the charges expanded significantly. By the time Riyles stood trial in October 2019, the full charge sheet reflected the breadth of what he had done that afternoon. He faced murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 5 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of cruelty to children in the 2nd degree, because Daniel's children had been present and within the line of fire, 4 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. The trial took place in DeKalb County Superior Court. Senior Assistant District Attorney Lena Pope prosecuted the case, assisted by Senior Assistant District Attorney Simone Hilton. Detective D. McBride of the DeKalb Police Department led the initial investigation. The prosecution's account of what happened was straightforward and backed by physical evidence, witness testimony, and the circumstances of the scene. Daniel Wise had done nothing to provoke an attack. He had come to pick up his children. He had gotten into an argument with his ex-girlfriend, a completely ordinary event in the context of a co-parenting relationship. Riyles had watched that argument and chosen to act. He had approached from behind, struck Daniel in the head with the weapon before firing a single shot, and then fired 13 rounds into a man who was already injured and bleeding. The 2 counts of cruelty to children were significant. The prosecution argued, and the jury agreed, that Riyles had committed his crime in the direct presence of Daniel's children, exposing them to the violence. The oldest child present was 7 years old. The youngest was 4. On October 31st, 2019, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 5 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of cruelty to children in the 2nd degree, 4 counts of possession of a firearm during a felony, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Sentencing was held on November 4, 2019, before DeKalb County Superior Court Judge Clarence F. Seeliger. A statement from Daniel Wise's family had been submitted to the court. It described what had been taken from them, not just a son, a father, a brother, but a man who had been present in his children's lives and had shown up that day specifically to be with them. Judge Seeliger sentenced Chavez Riyles to life in prison plus 65 years. The habitual offender and firearm enhancements that applied to Ryles's prior felony conviction were factored into the sentencing. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. Robbie Johnson, the co-worker who put himself between the gun and the children in that back seat, survived his spinal injury. He was 29 at the time of the shooting. He is now in his 30s, living with the consequences of a decision he made in a split second to protect children who were not his own. Daniel Wise's 3 children lost their father at a custody exchange. The 9-year-old, the 7-year-old, and the 4-year-old were either present or connected to that afternoon in ways that no child should ever be. The 2 who were in the car that day were there when Riyles fired 13 rounds. They were there when their father drove away bleeding. They were there at the start of something that ended with them growing up without him. The Georgia Supreme Court reviewed the case in March 2025 under docket number S24A1101, confirming the conviction stood. Chavez Riyles is currently serving his sentence in the Georgia State Prison System. He will not be leaving. Daniel Wise came to pick up his kids. He got into an argument that thousands of co-parents have every week. The difference was that his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend had decided to be there, watching, armed, and ready to make sure that argument ended in only one way. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The cases we have covered so far involved men who targeted the new partner, the replacement, the man who had taken their place. The next case is different. The ex did not just go after the new partner. He went after both of them, chasing one through a parking lot and hunting the other down inside a locked bathroom, while surveillance cameras recorded every second of it. Leonardo Hyanes. On the afternoon of November 25, 2020, the day before Thanksgiving, a man named Leonardo Hyanes walked across the street from his apartment and killed 2 people. The first was Ernesto Carlos Aguilar Vasquez, 32, his ex-wife's new boyfriend. The second was Iluminada Marrero Perdomo, 27, his ex-wife. Surveillance cameras in the apartment complex captured the entire thing. When Houston police officers arrived in response to calls about shots fired, they found Hyanes walking out of the apartment building still carrying the murder weapon. He did not run. He surrendered on the spot. Their elementary school-age son was not in the apartment during the shooting. He was nearby with a babysitter, unhurt. Leonardo Hyanes pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder in April 2024 and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. He will be eligible for parole in 30 years. Iluminada Marrero Perdomo had been married to Leonardo Hyanes. The 2 were Cuban immigrants living in southwest Houston, part of a close-knit Cuban community in that part of the city. They had a son together, a boy who was in elementary school at the time of the shooting. At some point before November 2020, Illuminada and Hyanes had separated and divorced. She moved into an apartment in a complex on the 6400 block of South Gessner Road in southwest Houston. Hyanes lived in another apartment in the same complex, directly across the street from her unit. Illuminada had started a new relationship. Her new boyfriend was Ernesto Carlos Aguilar Vasquez, 32. Like Illuminada and Hyanes, Ernesto was also Cuban. He and Illuminada were living together in her apartment. The three of them, Illuminada, Ernesto, and the couple's young son, were operating in close proximity to Leonardo Hyanes every single day, given that he lived directly across the street in the same complex. The custody arrangement for their son meant that the boy moved between both parents. On the afternoon of November 25, 2020, a family member was babysitting the boy at Hyanes' apartment while he was at work. Hyanes came home from his shift, expecting to spend the rest of the evening with his son. What he found instead was that Illuminada had made plans to pick the boy up earlier than he had anticipated, to take him to her apartment for the night. According to prosecutors, that was the trigger. What happened over the next several minutes was captured on the apartment complex's surveillance system in significant detail. Hyanes did not call Illuminada to argue about it. He did not go back inside and cool down. He walked directly across the street to her apartment and knocked on or entered through the door. Ernesto was inside. Hyanes opened fire on Ernesto immediately. Ernesto ran. What followed was not a brief exchange, it was a chase. Hyanes ran after Ernesto through the apartment and out into the parking lot, continuing to shoot as Ernesto tried to get away. The surveillance footage showed Hyanes shooting Ernesto in the back as he fled. Ernesto Aguilar Vasquez collapsed and died in the parking lot in a pool of his own blood, having been shot multiple times while trying to escape. Hyanes turned around and walked back to the apartment. Illuminada had heard the shooting. By the time Hyanes returned, she had locked the apartment door. Hyanes tried to shoot the lock off the door. That did not work. He then fired shots through a window, breaking the glass, and climbed through the broken window into the apartment. Illuminada had moved to the bathroom and barricaded herself inside. Hyanes shot through the bathroom door multiple times. Illuminada Marrero Perdomo was killed inside her own bathroom, having survived only long enough to lock herself in and wait. Neighbors throughout the complex had heard the shots and called 911. Houston police officers arrived while the situation was still unfolding. As they pulled up to the building, they saw Leonardo Hyanes walking out of the front of the apartment building. He was still carrying the murder weapon. He surrendered to officers without resistance and was taken into custody immediately. He was charged with capital murder. The charge applied because he had killed two people in the same criminal episode. The couple's young son was with a babysitter nearby and was not present during the shooting. He was not physically harmed. Houston police confirmed in their initial statements that the shooting appeared to be a domestic-related double murder. The victims were identified as Illuminada Marrero Perdomo and Ernesto Carlos Aguilar Vasquez. The neighborhood, and particularly the Cuban community in southwest Houston, was devastated. Prosecutors later noted that Hyanes, Illuminada, Ernesto, and most of the neighbors who witnessed or heard the crime were all Cuban immigrants. It was a tight community. Nearly everyone in those buildings knew one another. Ernesto Aguilar Vasquez was 32 years old. He had been Illuminada's boyfriend and was living with her at the time of the shooting. He was shot while running away from a man he could not have stopped and had done nothing to provoke beyond being in a relationship with a woman whose ex-husband had decided he could not accept it. Illuminada Marrero Perdomo was 27 years old. She had left a marriage, built a new life, found a new partner, and was raising a son. She died hiding behind a locked bathroom door on the day before Thanksgiving, while her child was a few hundred feet away. The capital murder charge against Hyanes, which in Texas applies when a defendant kills more than one person in the same criminal transaction, carried the possibility of life without the possibility of parole, if convicted at trial. Prosecutors from the Harris County District Attorney's Office prepared to take the case to trial. Assistant District Attorneys Stephanie Abner and Steve Walsh, both chiefs in the Domestic Violence Division of the DA's office, were assigned to prosecute. For nearly 4 years, the case moved through the court system. Then, in April 2024, on the eve of trial, Leonardo Hyanes pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder. The plea deal was brokered by Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg. By pleading guilty to murder rather than capital murder, Hyanes avoided the possibility of life without parole. The agreement secured 2 consecutive life sentences, meaning he would serve them back-to-back, not simultaneously. Under Texas law, he would be eligible for parole consideration after serving 30 years. As part of the agreement, Hyanes waived his right to appeal the conviction or the sentence. The practical effect of the plea was also significant for the family. It meant that the couple's son, still a child, now several years older and living with the reality of having lost both his mother and his new stepfather in one afternoon, and his father to prison, would not have to testify in open court. Other family members and neighbours who had witnessed or heard the events of November 25, 2020, were also spared from having to relive that afternoon on the stand. Sentencing took place in April 2024. Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg released a statement. Domestic violence can have many different forms, and it can easily escalate to murder. She said that in this case, a mother who was just trying to start a new life and her new boyfriend both lost their lives because a man with a gun got angry and started shooting. Assistant District Attorney Stephanie Abner addressed the impact on the couple's son directly. She pointed out that the child at the centre of the custody dispute was now left without his mother or his father because of his father's actions. She described children as too often becoming collateral damage in disputes between their parents, and she urged anyone in a similar situation to consider the consequences before escalating. Abner also noted the effect on the broader Cuban community in that part of Houston. Nearly everyone connected to this case, the victims, the perpetrator, the neighbours who witnessed it, had come from the same place and built their lives in the same neighbourhood. The shooting had torn through that community in ways that went beyond the 2 people who died. Leonardo Hyanes is currently serving 2 consecutive life sentences in the Texas prison system. He surrendered on the spot. He did not flee, did not deny it, did not construct an alibi. The surveillance footage had recorded everything. When police arrived, he walked out carrying the weapon. There was nothing to contest. What he did contest for nearly 4 years was the severity of the charges. The difference between capital murder and murder in Texas is the difference between life without any possibility of parole and life with parole eligibility at 30 years. Hyanes waited until the day before his trial was set to begin, then took the deal. He will be in his 80s before he is eligible to ask for parole. The son he and Leonardo shared grew up without his mother, without his father living at home, and with the knowledge of exactly what his father did on the day before Thanksgiving when he was an elementary school student. There are no holidays in that family that are not touched by November 25, 2020. There is no version of that child's life that does not carry the weight of what happened in that parking lot and in that bathroom on an afternoon when all Leonardo had done was make plans to pick up her son. Ernesto Aguilar Vasquez ran. He was shot in the back while running. He died in the parking lot. Leonardo locked herself in a bathroom. She was shot through the door. She died inside it. Their son was with a babysitter a few hundred feet away. Leonardo Hyanes walked out carrying the gun and gave himself up to the first officers who arrived. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The cases so far have all involved men who confronted the threat head-on, in driveways, in parking lots, through locked doors. The next case involves a man who did not confront anyone directly. He sat in his car outside a house for 3 hours, in the dark, waiting for his ex-girlfriend to come home. And when she did, she was not alone. Austin Daniel Hoff. On the evening of September 5, 2016, a 23-year-old man named Stephen Center was shot in the chest and killed at the front door of a house in Spring, Texas. He had been trying to stop someone from forcing their way inside. The person forcing his way in was Austin Daniel Hoff, the ex-boyfriend of the woman Stephen had recently started dating. Hoff had driven from Austin to Spring that day and parked outside the house. He sat in his car and waited for 3 hours before she came home. When she arrived with Stephen, Hoff got out of the car and tried to push his way through the front door. Stephen pushed back. Hoff shot him in the chest. Stephen Center died from that single gunshot wound. He was 23 years old. Austin Daniel Hoff was convicted of murder on February 28, 2023, nearly 7 years after the shooting, and sentenced to 23 years in prison. The length of the sentence was chosen by the jury, reportedly as a tribute to the age Stephen Center was when he was killed. Stephen Center was 23 years old at the time of his death. Beyond his age and his connection to the woman Hoff had been in a relationship with, the public record does not provide extensive biographical detail about Stephen's life before that evening. What is known is that he had recently started dating Hoff's ex-girlfriend, that he was with her the night of September 5, 2016, and that when Hoff tried to force his way into the house, Stephen Center stood in the doorway and tried to stop him. That decision cost him his life. Austin Daniel Hoff had grown up in Spring, Texas, a community in the northern Houston area. At some point before the shooting, he had been in a relationship with a woman who also lived in Spring. Hoff persuaded her to move with him to Austin, where he was working as an auto mechanic. The relationship continued in Austin for a period of time. Then she caught him cheating on her. After discovering the infidelity, she ended the relationship and moved back to Spring. She returned to the area she was from, to the house in Spring where she had lived before. Hoff stayed in Austin. The breakup was the result of his own actions. He had been the one who cheated, but that did not appear to factor into how he processed what came next. After she moved back to Spring, Hoff began harassing and stalking her. The nature and extent of that stalking in the months between the breakup and September 5, 2016, is not laid out in granular detail in the public record of the case. What prosecutors established at trial is that Hoff had been harassing her, that he had eventually driven from Austin to Spring on the day of the shooting, and that he parked outside her house and waited. He sat in that car for 3 hours. 3 hours is a long time to sit outside someone's house. It is long enough to change your mind. It is long enough to drive back to Austin. It is long enough to call someone, to think about what you are doing, to consider what happens next. Hoff sat there for 3 hours and did none of those things. He waited. When she came home, she was not alone. She had Stephen Center with her. The two of them walked toward the front door together. Hoff got out of his car. He approached the house and tried to force his way through the front door as the couple attempted to go inside. Stephen Center pushed him back. He was trying to stop Hoff from entering the house. The two men struggled at the doorway. During that struggle, Hoff pulled out a gun and shot Stephen Center in the chest. Stephen collapsed. Hoff's ex-girlfriend was there when it happened. She watched her new boyfriend get shot at her own front door by the man she had left. Hoff did not stay. He took off the shirt he was wearing, got into his car, and drove back in the direction of Austin. He left Stephen Center dying at the front door. Stephen Center was transported to hospital but did not survive. He was 23 years old. Hoff was driving back toward Austin when his father reached him by phone. His father spoke to him and convinced him to turn around and come back to Spring. Hoff returned. When he arrived, Harris County Sheriff's Office deputies were waiting. They found Hoff and searched his vehicle. Inside the car, they recovered the shirt he had taken off after the shooting and the gun he had used to shoot Stephen Center. Both the shirt and the gun were covered in Stephen Center's blood. Hoff was arrested and charged with murder. What followed was one of the longer gaps between crime and conviction in any of the cases covered in this video. The shooting happened on September 5, 2016. The trial did not take place until February 2023, 6.5 years later. The reasons for that delay are not fully detailed in the public record, but the case did eventually make it to a Harris County courtroom, where it was prosecuted by Assistant District Attorneys Andrew Figliuzzi and Andrew Sanchez. The trial lasted 7 days. The evidence against Hoff was substantial. His ex-girlfriend had witnessed the shooting directly. The gun and the blood-covered shirt had been found in his car when he returned to Spring that same night. The physical evidence connected Hoff to the scene and to the weapon. The 3-hour wait outside the house established that this was not a spontaneous confrontation. Hoff had driven from another city, parked outside her home, and waited with deliberate patience for her to return. The prosecution framed the case in terms that went beyond the shooting itself. Assistant District Attorney Andrew Figliuzzi addressed it directly after the verdict. This case was about a sense of entitlement. The defendant felt entitled to take back his ex-girlfriend. He felt entitled to kill her new boyfriend. He felt entitled to get away with murder. Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg echoed that framing in her public statement. Cases like this are why stalking and intimate partner violence are taken so seriously. This man decided to lie in wait for 3 hours for his ex-girlfriend to arrive at her own house. When she arrived with her new boyfriend, he attempted to force himself into the home and ultimately shot and killed the new boyfriend. The jury convicted Hoff of murder on February 28, 2023. Sentencing followed on the same day, after 7 days of testimony. The jury sentenced Austin Daniel Hoff to 23 years in prison. According to Assistant District Attorney Andrew Figliuzzi, the number was chosen by the jury as a tribute to the age Stephen Center was when Hoff killed him. The sentence requires Hoff to serve at least half, a minimum of 11.5 years, before he becomes eligible for parole consideration. Stephen Center was 23 years old when he died at a front door in Spring, Texas, trying to stop a man from breaking into a woman's home. He had recently started dating her. He had not done anything to Hoff. He had not been part of any conflict between Hoff and his ex-girlfriend. He was simply the person she had started seeing after she left a man who had cheated on her. And on the night of September 5, 2016, he was the one who stood in the doorway and tried to hold the line. Austin Daniel Hoff cheated on his girlfriend, lost the relationship as a direct result of that, stalked her after she left, drove from another city to wait outside her house for 3 hours, and then shot the man she had moved on with. He was convicted nearly 7 years after the shooting. He will serve a minimum of 11.5 years in a Texas prison before he can ask to be released. The 23-year sentence handed down by that jury was not a coincidence. It was a statement. Stephen Center was 23. The jury wanted that number attached to what happened to him. __quote_4__. Austin Daniel Hoff was the ex who drove to her house and waited. The next case we are covering is about an ex who did not wait outside. He was already inside, living in the same apartment as his ex-girlfriend, her new boyfriend, and a 6-year-old child. And what happened in that bedroom in the early hours of an October morning in Washington, D.C., was captured entirely in the text messages he sent in the hour before he pulled the trigger. Marcus Walker. In the early hours of October 11, 2022, a man named Eric King was shot and killed inside a bedroom in an apartment on the 800 block of 21st Street Northeast in Washington, D.C. He was 28 years old. He had been in bed with a woman he was dating when the door to the locked bedroom was forced open. The man who forced it open was Marcus Walker, the woman's ex-boyfriend. Walker had been living in the living room of the same apartment. He had spent the previous hour sending the woman aggressive text messages. Then he broke through the door and shot Eric King twice, once in the chest and once in the groin. A 6-year-old child was in the room when it happened. Eric King died at the scene. Marcus Walker was 22 years old at the time of the shooting. He was convicted of second-degree murder while armed on May 7, 2024, and sentenced to 30 years in prison on September 6, 2024. Eric King was 28 years old. He had been dating the woman whose apartment this was. Beyond his age and his connection to her, the public record does not provide extensive detail about Eric's life before that morning. What is documented is that he was in a relationship with Walker's ex-girlfriend, that he was in her apartment that night, and that he was in bed when Marcus Walker broke through a locked door and shot him. He had done nothing in the lead-up to his death except be in a relationship with a woman whose ex-boyfriend had not accepted that the relationship was over. Marcus Walker and the woman had previously been in a romantic relationship. By October 2022, that relationship had ended. Despite the breakup, Walker was still living in her apartment, specifically in the living room. The woman, her new boyfriend Eric King, and a 6-year-old child occupied the bedroom. Walker occupied the living room. This was the arrangement in place on the night of October 10th, going into the early hours of October 11th, 2022. According to court documents and the evidence presented at trial, Walker and his 2 children were also living in the apartment at the time. The precise details of how this living arrangement had come to exist, whether it was a financial situation, a co-parenting arrangement, or some other circumstance, are not fully spelled out in the public record. What is clear is that Walker knew Eric King was in the apartment. He knew the relationship between his ex-girlfriend and King was romantic and ongoing. And he knew, on the night of October 10, 2022, that King was in the bedroom with her. At some point in the early hours of October 11, 2022, Walker became aware that his ex-girlfriend and Eric King were engaged in sexual relations in the bedroom. According to the government's evidence presented at trial, Walker responded by sending his ex-girlfriend a series of aggressive text messages. He sent them over the course of approximately 1 hour. The messages expressed his anger at what was happening in the bedroom. Prosecutors described the texts as calling her disrespectful for what she was doing while he was in the living room of the same apartment. During the trial, the text messages were entered into evidence and read to the jury. They documented Walker's escalating anger over that 1 hour period. They showed a man who was not calming down as time passed, but getting more agitated. They showed a man who knew exactly what he intended to do. After approximately 1 hour of sending those messages, Walker got up from the living room. He went to the bedroom door. The door was locked. He forced it open. What happened next was described in court by prosecutors and corroborated by the surviving witnesses. Walker entered the room and demanded that the couple stop what they were doing. When they did not comply, he opened fire. He shot Eric King twice, once in the chest and once in the groin. Eric King was pronounced dead at the scene. A 6-year-old child was present in the bedroom at the time of the shooting. Walker's ex-girlfriend was also in the room and was present when King was shot. She was not physically injured during the shooting itself, but she was one of the assault charges connected to Walker's conduct. Prosecutors charged him with assault with a dangerous weapon in connection with both the adult woman and the 6-year-old child who were in the room during the shooting. After the shooting, Metropolitan Police Department officers responded to the Jetu apartments on 21st Street Northeast. Walker was identified quickly. He was 22 years old at the time and was from Fort Washington, Maryland. He was arrested and charged initially with second-degree murder. As the case developed and moved through the court system, the charge sheet expanded to reflect the full scope of what had happened in that bedroom. By the time Walker stood trial in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia in May 2024, he faced second-degree murder while armed, 2 counts of assault with a dangerous weapon, covering both the woman and the 6-year-old child, second-degree cruelty to children, 3 counts of possession of a firearm during a crime of violence, and possession of a large-capacity ammunition feeding device. The case was prosecuted by the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. The trial took place before the Honorable Judge Robert Oken. The prosecution's case was built on several layers of evidence. The text messages Walker had sent in the hour before the shooting were central. They established intent, they established timeline, and they established that Walker had not acted in any kind of sudden rage, but had spent a full hour building toward what he then went and did. The messages were not ambiguous. They documented his anger explicitly and in his own words. Walker's ex-girlfriend testified at trial. She identified Walker as the shooter. Her testimony directly corroborated the physical evidence and the sequence of events described by prosecutors. The defense argued at trial that the prosecution had not met its burden and urged the jury to find Walker not guilty. The specifics of the defense's arguments beyond that are not detailed extensively in the public record of the case. The jury returned its verdict on May 7, 2024. Marcus Walker was found guilty on all counts: second-degree murder while armed, 2 counts of assault with a dangerous weapon, second-degree cruelty to children, 3 counts of possession of a firearm during a crime of violence, possession of a large-capacity ammunition feeding device. Judge Robert Oken scheduled sentencing for July 19, 2024. Sentencing ultimately took place on September 6, 2024. Judge Robert Oken sentenced Marcus Walker to 30 years in prison. In addition to the prison term, Walker was ordered to serve 5 years of supervised release upon completion of his sentence. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia announced the sentence publicly. The office noted the presence of the 6-year-old child in the room at the time of the shooting as a significant factor in the case. Marcus Walker was 24 years old at the time of sentencing. He will serve 30 years before he is eligible for release. He will be in his mid-50s at the earliest before he walks out of a federal facility. Eric King was 28 years old. He was in a woman's apartment, in her bedroom, in a relationship with her. He had not done anything to Marcus Walker. He had not sought out a confrontation. He had been shot through a door that Walker forced open after an hour of sending threatening text messages from the living room of the same apartment. The 6-year-old child who was in that bedroom has grown up with the memory of what happened in that room on October 11th, 2022. The woman who was in that bed has lived with it too. Walker's ex-girlfriend watched the man she was with get shot twice at close range by the man she used to be with, in the bedroom of her own apartment, while a child slept nearby. The text messages Walker sent in that hour before he broke through the door are what makes this case particularly stark. He did not snap. He did not act without warning. He sat in the living room of that apartment for a full hour, sending message after message, and then he got up and did exactly what those messages had been building toward. The jury saw those texts, they read them, and they took only until May 7th, 2024 to decide what they meant. 30 years. What sets Walker's case apart from the others in this video is the setting. Every other case involved the ex going somewhere, driving to a house, walking across a street, positioning himself near a custody exchange, travelling to another city. Walker did not have to go anywhere. He was already there, in the same apartment, a locked door away from the man his ex-girlfriend had moved on with. The proximity did not stop him. In some ways, it may have made it worse, because he had an entire hour to reconsider, and he did not. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case we are covering takes a different shape entirely. It is not about a man who waited outside, or drove from another city, or lived in the same apartment. It is about an 18-year-old boy on a graduation trip with his friends, his ex-girlfriend, and a text message she sent to someone else, and what he did to her in a hotel room in Myrtle Beach, while the rest of their group slept nearby. Blake Linkis. In June 2023, a group of teenagers from Ohio traveled to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, to celebrate finishing high school. They had just graduated. The trip was supposed to be the kind of thing you talk about for years afterward, a last stretch of freedom before everyone goes their separate ways. One of the people on that trip was 18-year-old Natalie Martin from Roseville, Ohio. Another was 18-year-old Blake Linkis from Blue Rock, Ohio. Natalie and Blake had dated since their sophomore year of high school. By the time the trip happened, they had broken up. Natalie had made clear to her friends that she was single and that she and Blake had agreed to see other people. Blake had not made peace with that. On the night of June 6, 2023, Blake Linkis manually strangled Natalie Martin to death in a room at their vacation rental on Maison Drive in the Myrtle Beach area. It took 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The rest of their friend group was in the same building. No one knew what was happening until it was over. Natalie Martin was 18 years old. She was from Roseville, Ohio, and had been best friends with a girl named Brooklyn Ferrell for 12 years. Brooklyn later described Natalie as someone whose memory gave her the strength to get up every day. The two had been inseparable through school. Natalie and Blake Linkis had started dating when both of them were in their sophomore year at Philo High School. The relationship lasted into their senior year, but it ended in early 2023. According to prosecutors, the breakup happened in February or March of 2023, after a physical incident in which Linkis shoved Natalie during an argument. That shoving incident was the breaking point. Natalie ended the relationship. Brooklyn Ferrell later told reporters that Natalie had been dealing with abuse from Linkis throughout the relationship, and that the shoving incident was what finally pushed her to leave. After the breakup, Natalie was open about the fact that she and Blake had agreed to see other people. She was moving forward. Blake Linkis was not. Brooklyn Ferrell described him as constantly trying to get Natalie back in the months between the breakup and the trip. He texted Brooklyn asking what he should do to win Natalie back. He apologized to Natalie repeatedly. He was, in Brooklyn's words, trying to make amends all the time. Natalie was not interested in reconciling. She had made her decision. She was going on the graduation trip as a single person, and she was treating it that way. The group of friends graduated from Philo High School on May 26, 2023. The Myrtle Beach trip followed shortly after. Both Natalie and Blake were part of the group. At least 5 other friends were staying at the vacation rental on Maison Drive. The fact that 2 people who had recently broken up, one of whom had not accepted it, were going on the same trip, staying in the same place, was something that people in their circle were aware of. Brooklyn Ferrell had been planning to go on the trip but could not make it. She and Natalie stayed in contact throughout. The day before Natalie's death, June 5, 2023, The group attended events and spent time together in the Myrtle Beach area. During that day, an argument broke out between Natalie and Blake over Natalie texting a boy who lived in Myrtle Beach. Prosecutors said the dispute happened the day before the murder. According to Brooklyn Ferrell's account to reporters, the argument was resolved relatively quickly at the time, but Linkis had not let go of what had started it. Natalie texting another boy, exercising the freedom she had told everyone she now had gotten under his skin in a way that the surface resolution of the argument did not fix. On the evening of June 6, 2023, the group went to an event at the House of Blues in the Myrtle Beach area. They spent time there before heading back to the vacation rental. As the night wound down and people returned to the condo, the group settled in for the night. At some point after 10:17 p.m. on June 6, 2023, Natalie Martin's phone went silent. After 10:17 p.m., there was no further phone activity recorded from her. What happened in the room she shared with Linkis after that point was described by prosecutors in court during the plea hearing on March 3, 2025. Blake Linkis strangled Natalie Martin manually. He used his hands. He wrapped them around her neck and applied enough force to kill her. Manual strangulation, as Judge Dedra L. Jefferson noted during sentencing, takes an inordinate amount of force. It is not something that happens accidentally or without sustained physical effort. The medical examiner's findings established that Natalie Martin died from manual strangulation. The act took approximately 3 minutes and 30 seconds, according to the account given by Natalie's best friend Brooklyn Ferrell during her statement in court. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. After Natalie was dead, Linkis remained in the room with her body. According to accounts from friends who were in the building, he was alone in the locked room with her corpse for a significant period of time. At some point during that period, he apparently attempted to take his own life. Members of the group later described hearing loud noises, 3 loud thuds, at some point during the night. One person checked the living room but noticed nothing. The bedroom door was locked. As the night wore on, the rest of the group returned from wherever they had been and fell asleep. It was not until approximately 2 hours after Linkis left the room that the situation became clear to everyone else. Linkis burst out of the bedroom bleeding and speaking quickly. He kept repeating the same thing. "Natalie's not waking up." 2 of Natalie's friends went into the bedroom. They found her on the floor. They started CPR. They called 911. Horry County Police and emergency services responded to the vacation rental on Mason Drive. They found Natalie Martin on the floor of the bedroom. She was pronounced dead. The time of the discovery was the morning of June 7, 2023. Linkis was at the scene when police arrived. He had injuries consistent with a self-harm attempt. Blake Linkis was 18 years old. He was arrested and charged with murder. He was taken to the J. Reuben Long Detention Center in Horry County. In the days that followed, Natalie Martin's family was notified. Her father, Jesse Martin, described getting in the car and driving to Myrtle Beach the moment they found out Natalie was missing, only to receive a call from the Horry County Coroner's Office telling them she was dead before they even arrived. He described the moment of understanding that they were not going to see their daughter again. A bond hearing was held in June 2023 before 3rd Judicial Circuit Judge Thomas Cooper Jr. Natalie's family released a statement for the hearing, saying that Linkis should never, ever be free again, and that anyone who felt differently should be ashamed of themselves. Despite this, Judge Cooper set bond at $150,000, with conditions. Linkis had to waive extradition to Ohio, agree to house arrest at his parents' home, wear an electronic monitoring device, and undergo a mental health evaluation. Blake Linkis was released on bond and returned to Ohio. He lived with his parents, monitored electronically, for 635 days before his case went to a resolution. 635 days. Jesse Martin addressed this directly in court on March 3, 2025. 635 days of his daughter's murderer out running around in Ohio, eating his mother's food, sleeping in his own bed. He said he did not know what the people of Horry County thought about that, but it did not sit right with him. Brooklyn Ferrell also spoke about those 635 days from her own perspective. She had lost her best friend of 12 years. She had been supposed to be on that trip. She was processing that grief while watching the person responsible for it live freely in the same state where they had all grown up together. During the lead-up to trial, additional details about Linkis emerged. Prosecutors described him as a very controlling, insecure, and jealous person during the relationship. Brooklyn Ferrell corroborated this in her accounts to reporters, saying that Natalie had been dealing with his behavior throughout their time together, and that the shoving incident earlier in 2023 was the event that finally broke things. Linkis' defense attorney, Francis A. Humphreys Jr., later characterized the killing as fueled by alcohol, jealousy, and confusion. He noted that Linkis was on the autism spectrum, which the defense argued affected his ability to manage explosive anger. Humphreys also indicated during sentencing proceedings that he believed a jury might have returned a verdict of voluntary manslaughter rather than murder if the case had gone to trial, and that Linkis had decided he did not want to put the family through a trial. On March 3, 2025, the day his trial was scheduled to begin, Blake Linkis entered the courtroom and pleaded guilty to one count of murder before Judge Dedra L. Jefferson. He had no prior criminal history. By pleading guilty, he was facing a minimum of 30 years under South Carolina law, with a maximum of life in prison. Before sentencing, Linkis was permitted to make a brief statement to the court. He said he was sorry. He said he had sworn to protect Natalie and had failed. He said he chose not to go to trial because he did not want to put Natalie's family through any more pain. He said, "I chose no trial to end some pain for Natalie's family and everyone else." Jesse Martin spoke next. He addressed the court about his daughter and about the 635 days his family had spent waiting while Linkis lived at home. He said the number of years in the sentence did not mean anything to him personally. He asked the judge to set a precedent for cases like this one. Brooklyn Ferrell delivered her statement. She told the court that around 3.5 minutes was how long it took Blake Linkis to manually strangle her best friend. She said, 3.5 minutes he had to change his mind, just for a second, to allow my best friend to live. Chief Deputy Solicitor Scott Hickson spoke on behalf of the prosecution. He described Linkis as controlling, insecure, and jealous. He laid out the sequence of events: the relationship, the breakup, the shoving incident, the trip, the argument over the text messages, and what happened in the bedroom after 10:17 p.m. on June 6th. Judge Dedra L. Jefferson then addressed what she was about to sentence. She noted the inherently brutal nature of manual strangulation. She acknowledged the mitigating factors the defense had raised: Linkis being on the autism spectrum, the presence of alcohol, his young age at the time, his lack of prior criminal history, and the fact that he had pleaded guilty rather than forcing the family through a trial. She read letters submitted by Linkis' family members, who were visibly emotional in the courtroom as their son was handcuffed and led away. Judge Jefferson said that a minimum sentence of 30 years would not be appropriate under these circumstances. She sentenced Blake William Linkis to 45 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Linkis' mother, father, and sister were in the courtroom when the sentence was handed down. They were visibly emotional. Linkis was handcuffed and taken into custody immediately. He had arrived at the hearing free, living at his parents' home in Blue Rock, Ohio, monitored by an electronic bracelet. He left in handcuffs. Natalie Martin's father said the number of years did not mean anything to him. What it meant to him was that his daughter was gone at 18 years old, killed on what was supposed to be a celebration of finishing school by the boy she had dated since she was a sophomore in high school, and then had the courage to leave. In December 2025, Linkis filed for post-conviction relief from his South Carolina prison facility. He argued in the filing that he was not guilty of murder because the killing had not been intentional or premeditated. He wrote that he had planned to fight at trial to have the charge reduced to manslaughter, but had pleaded guilty because he felt too guilty to put the family through a trial. He said, "I felt too bad going about this case any longer, putting the victim's family through that." He asked the court to reduce his charge and his sentence. As of the time this script was written, that filing was active. He has not been resentenced. His 45-year sentence remains in place. Blake Linkis will be in his 60s before he finishes his sentence, if he serves it in full. He was 18 when he killed Natalie Martin. She was 18 when she died. She had broken up with him in February or March of 2023 because he had shoved her. She had gone on a graduation trip with her friends and treated herself as the single person she was. She had texted a boy she knew in Myrtle Beach. None of those things were wrong. None of them were reasons for what happened to her. They were simply the ordinary things a newly single 18-year-old does, and Blake Linkis decided they were unacceptable. Brooklyn Ferrell has spoken publicly about carrying Natalie's memory forward. She told the court that remembering who Natalie was as a person had helped her wake up every day and make something of herself. Natalie Martin has been gone since June 6, 2023. She was found on the floor of a vacation rental bedroom on Maison Drive. Her best friend was supposed to be on that trip. Her father drove to Myrtle Beach when he heard she was missing, and before he got there, the coroner's office called. 3.5 minutes. That is what Brooklyn Ferrell told the court. 3.5 minutes was how long it took. 3.5 minutes during which Blake Linkis could have stopped, could have let go, could have made a different choice. He did not. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The cases in this video have all involved a moment, a parking lot, a driveway, a locked bedroom door, an apartment building hallway, where someone made the decision to act and someone else lost their life because of it. The next case involves a man who did not stumble into that moment. He planned for it. He sat in the back seat of his own mother's car and had her drive him to the location where he knew his girlfriend and the man he believed she was seeing would be. And what he did in that parking lot, in front of a Walgreens, while a professional golf tournament was being played less than a mile away, was captured on surveillance footage and ended with 2 people dead on the pavement. Christian Barios. On the night of March 13, 2026, a 32-year-old man named Christian Barios had his mother drive him to a Walgreens pharmacy on State Road A1A North in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. He rode in the back seat. When his mother pulled into the parking lot and he spotted the vehicle he had been looking for, he got out of the car before she had fully stopped and walked toward it. Multiple gunshots were fired. 2 people, Melissa Wood and Jason Chatham, were struck multiple times. Both were transported to Baptist Beaches Medical Center. Both died from their injuries. Barios fled the scene on foot. He crossed onto the grounds of TPC Sawgrass, where the Players' Championship was scheduled to resume the following morning. He broke into a home while the family inside was sleeping, left behind the clothes he had been wearing during the shooting, and stole their BMW X3 from the garage. He drove the stolen vehicle toward Nassau County. Law enforcement tracked him using cell phone location data and spotted the stolen SUV. A chase followed. Officers performed a pit maneuver. Barios crashed, fled on foot into a wooded area, and was tracked by canine units from both the St. Johns County and Nassau County Sheriff's offices. He was apprehended just before 8 a.m. on March 14, 2026, less than 10 hours after the shooting. According to his arrest warrant, Barios later told investigators he was angry at Melissa and Jason over what he described as their infidelity. He recounted the events of the night in detail, including the shooting, the flight from the scene, the burglary, and the theft of the car. Christian Barios has been indicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder by a St. Johns County grand jury. He is being held without bond. His case is pending trial as of the time this script was written. He has not been convicted. Melissa Wood was a mother of 2 who had become a grandmother 1 year before her death. Her brother described her publicly, through a GoFundMe campaign set up in her memory, as someone who had been killed by an insecure, jealous ex-boyfriend. Her daughter spoke to local outlet WOKV after the shooting and said that her mother had not been cheating on anyone, that her mother's relationship with Barios was over by the time the shooting happened, and that Melissa Wood had moved on. Jason Chatham was the man Melissa had been with that night. Beyond his name and his connection to Melissa Wood, the public record at the time this script was written does not provide extensive biographical detail about Jason Chatham's life. What is known is that he was in a vehicle with Melissa Wood in the Walgreens parking lot on the night of March 13, 2026, and that he was shot multiple times and died from those wounds. Melissa Wood's estranged husband, Jeff Wood, spoke to First Coast News in the days after the shooting. He said the community needed closure from what had happened and announced that a public vigil would be held for Melissa at Mickler's Landing on March 20, 2026. Christian Barios was 32 years old at the time of the shooting. His criminal history was extensive and well documented. Court records and statements from the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office established that Barios had been arrested more than 20 times over the course of his adult life. His record included 2 prior prison sentences. His most recent prison term had ended in November 2023, less than 2.5 years before the Walgreens shooting. In 2020, Barios had been arrested in Duval County after allegedly punching and stomping a woman who was 9 months pregnant. According to the arrest report from that incident, he also approached the woman with a knife and threatened to kill her. That case resulted in a conviction. In 2025, a domestic violence injunction was ordered against Barios in Duval County. An injunction of this kind is a civil court order requiring a person to stay away from and have no contact with someone who has sought protection from them. The injunction was obtained by someone who believed they needed legal protection from Barios. At the time of the Walgreens shooting on March 13, 2026, Barios was on probation. Specifically, he was serving drug offender probation, stemming from a 2025 Duval County conviction for methamphetamine possession. That probation term was not scheduled to end until August 2027. He was not supposed to be in possession of a firearm. He was not supposed to be committing any new crimes. St. Johns County Sheriff Rob Hardwick addressed this directly in a press conference held in the early hours of March 14th. Barios was out of prison again on probation, committing another violent felony. The question of how a man with more than 20 arrests, 2 prior prison sentences, a documented history of violence against women, including a pregnant woman, an active domestic violence injunction, and an ongoing probation term, was walking free in March 2026, was not one that the public record had fully answered at the time this script was written. What the record does show is that he was. In the days and weeks leading up to March 13, 2026, Barios had become convinced that Melissa Wood was involved with Jason Chatham. Whether this belief was accurate, partially accurate, or entirely wrong is something Melissa Wood's own daughter disputed publicly. She told reporters that her mother's relationship with Barios was over and that Melissa had moved on. The arrest warrant describes Barios as having gone to the Walgreens that night to confront Melissa and the man he believed she was in a relationship with over infidelity. His own characterization of his motivation, as recorded in the arrest warrant, was that he was angry at Melissa and Jason over their alleged infidelity. What the arrest warrant and subsequent reporting make clear is that Barios knew where Melissa and Jason would be that night. He knew well enough to call his mother, ask for a ride, and have her drive him there specifically. He rode in the back seat. His mother drove. She told deputies after the shooting that she had heard the moment gunshots rang out from the parking lot while she was still in the vehicle. On the night of March 13, 2026, Barios' mother drove him to the Walgreens at 860 A1A North in Ponte Vedra Beach. The parking lot of that Walgreens sits in an area known for its low crime rate. Ponte Vedra Beach is an affluent coastal community in St. Johns County, one of the wealthiest counties in Florida. It is the home of TPC Sawgrass, the stadium course that hosts the Players' Championship each year, one of the most prestigious events on the PGA Tour. The Players was being played that week. The tournament grounds were less than a mile from the Walgreens parking lot. When Barios' mother pulled into the lot and he spotted Melissa Wood's vehicle, he got out of the car. According to the arrest warrant, he immediately and frantically exited the vehicle and began walking toward Melissa and Jason. Multiple shots were fired. Investigators later recovered .380 caliber shell casings at the scene. An empty handgun holster was found in the vehicle Barios had arrived in, the car his mother had driven him there in. Melissa Wood and Jason Chatham were both hit by multiple gunshots. They were transported to Baptist Beach's medical center. Both died from their injuries. Barios' mother called 911 after the shooting. Barios ran. He did not get back into his mother's car. He fled on foot from the parking lot, moving north and crossing Palm Valley Road. He made it onto the property of TPC Sawgrass. Sheriff Hardwick said that deputies believed Barios had contact with multiple people who were simply on the tournament grounds, staff, workers, or others connected to the Players' Championship, which was scheduled to resume that Saturday morning. Law enforcement flooded the area. St. Johns County Sheriff's Office deputies, K-9 teams, and units from multiple agencies conducted a thorough search of the TPC Sawgrass grounds and the surrounding area. Investigators also tracked Barios using cell phone location data. His phone was eventually found discarded inside a generator on the TPC Sawgrass property. At some point in the early hours of March 14th, Barios turned up at an address in Jacksonville. He was wet. He was frantic. According to the arrest warrant, he admitted to a witness at that location that he had committed the shootings. He told the witness he did not want to go back to jail. Shortly after 4 a.m. on March 14th, a burglary was reported at a home in Ponte Vedra Beach, near the shooting scene. The homeowners were asleep inside when Barios entered the residence through a rear sliding glass door. He left behind the clothes he had been wearing during the killings. He stole the family's black BMW X3 SUV from their garage and drove it toward Nassau County. Nassau County Sheriff's Office deputies spotted the stolen vehicle. They attempted a traffic stop. Barios did not stop. A pursuit followed. Officers eventually performed a PIT maneuver, a tactical driving technique used to force a fleeing vehicle to spin and stop, and Barios crashed the BMW in a ditch near CR 108 and Middle Road in Callahan, in Nassau County. He fled the crashed vehicle on foot into a wooded area. K-9 units from the Nassau County and St. Johns County Sheriff's offices tracked him through the woods. He was taken into custody just before 8 a.m. on March 14, 2026, approximately 9.5 hours after the shooting in the Walgreens parking lot. He was initially held at the Nassau County Jail before being transferred to St. Johns County on March 18th. On March 13, 2026, Barios was interviewed by investigators. According to the arrest warrant, he recounted the events of the night: the shooting, the flight, the burglary, the theft of the car. He said he was angry at Melissa and Jason over their alleged infidelity. The arrest warrant states that he appeared to be concerned about the well-being of the victims, but did not make any direct admissions in that portion of the conversation, beyond what has been described publicly. The St. Johns County grand jury indicted Christian Barios on 2 counts of first-degree murder on April 1, 2026. The indictment also carried charges of burglary of an occupied dwelling, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, shooting into a conveyance, and grand theft of a motor vehicle over $20,000 and under $100,000. In Nassau County, Barios faced additional charges, including aggravated fleeing, resisting law enforcement without violence, trespass, reckless driving, and driving with a suspended license. He has been held without bond on the murder charges since his arrest. Melissa Wood's daughter told reporters that her mother had not cheated on anyone. She said the relationship between her mother and Barios was over. She said her mother had moved on. Melissa Wood had become a grandmother the year before her death. She had 2 children. She was killed in a parking lot in a community where violent crime almost never happens, by a man with more than 20 arrests and 2 prior prison sentences, who was on probation at the time. Jason Chatham was with her. He was shot multiple times in the same parking lot. He died at the same hospital. Barios' mother drove him there. She was in the car when the shots were fired. She called 911 afterward. Sheriff Rob Hardwick's characterization of the case at his early morning press conference on March 14th was unambiguous. Barios, he said, was a man who kept getting out of prison and kept committing violent felonies. The legal system had processed him more than 20 times. He had served 2 prison sentences. He had a domestic violence injunction against him. He was on probation. And on the night of March 13, 2026, he had his mother drive him to a pharmacy parking lot in Ponte Vedra Beach and shot 2 people dead because he believed his girlfriend was there with another man. Criminal defense attorney Michelle Suskauer, speaking to Action News Jax about the broader implications of the case, said it was every court's worst nightmare. A man with a significant record who is released and then charged with multiple homicides. She noted the importance of focusing not just on punishment, but on reducing the likelihood that someone will reoffend after release. The system, she said, needs to do more than just send people in and wait for them to come out. As of the time this script was written, Christian Barios has been indicted and is awaiting trial. He has not been convicted. The trial has not yet taken place. What has been established through the arrest warrant, the indictment, the sheriff's press conferences, and the reporting of multiple verified news outlets is the sequence of events on March 13th and 14th, 2026, and the criminal history Barios brought into that parking lot with him. Melissa Wood became a grandmother 1 year before she died. Her daughter said she had moved on from her relationship with Barios. Her brother called him an insecure, jealous ex-boyfriend on a public fundraising page set up in her memory. Her estranged husband organised a public vigil for her at the beach. Jason Chatham was in a vehicle in a parking lot. He did not survive. The man who shot them rode to the scene in the back seat of his mother's car, fled across a golf course, broke into a sleeping family's home, stole their car, led police on a chase, crashed into a ditch, ran into the woods, and was pulled out by dogs at 8 o'clock in the morning. He told a witness in Jacksonville, sometime before dawn, that he did not want to go back to jail. He is there now. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every case in this video has involved an ex who could not let go. Men who tracked, waited, planned, ambushed and killed because they had decided that their former partner moving on was something they were not willing to accept. Some of them acted in seconds. Some waited for hours. Some had been building toward it for months. What connects all of them is the same thing. A person who had every right to live their life made a choice to do exactly that, and someone who used to be in that life decided the choice was not theirs to make. Tony Miller Jr. On the evening of November 18, 2022, a man named William Wilson IV was sitting in a parked car on the 9100 block of East 38th Place on the east side of Indianapolis, Indiana. He was 30 years old. He was in the vehicle with a woman he was dating, the mother of a young girl she shared with her ex-boyfriend, Tony Miller Jr. They had driven to the house where Miller's mother lived to pick up the child for a scheduled visit. The little girl was in the car with them. Tony Miller Jr. opened fire on the vehicle. William Wilson IV was shot in the head. The woman was shot in the arm. Their daughter was in the car during the shooting. Wilson was rushed to hospital, but died 2 days later on November 20th, 2022. The woman survived. Their daughter was physically unharmed, but was present when her father shot the man sitting next to her mother. Tony Miller Jr. was found guilty of murder and attempted murder following a 2-day trial in May 2025. He was sentenced on June 11, 2025 to 105 years in prison. William Wilson IV was 30 years old at the time of his death. Beyond his age and his connection to Miller's ex-girlfriend, the public record does not provide extensive biographical detail about William's life. What is documented is that he had been dating Miller's ex-girlfriend, that he was with her on the evening of November 18, 2022, specifically to help pick up her daughter from a family member's house, and that he was shot in the head while sitting in a parked car and died 2 days later. He had done nothing to Tony Miller Jr. He was in a car at a house waiting to collect a child. Tony Miller Jr. and the woman had previously been in a romantic relationship. Together they had a daughter. By November 2022, the relationship between Miller and the woman had ended. She had moved on and was now in a relationship with William Wilson IV. The custody arrangement for their daughter meant that the child moved between both parents and their respective households. On the evening of November 18, 2022, the woman and Wilson drove to the 9100 block of East 38th Place, the home of Miller's mother, to pick up the daughter for a visit. This was the kind of exchange that happens in co-parenting situations every day across the country. A parent and their new partner driving to collect a child. It is ordinary. It is routine. It is, in the vast majority of cases, uneventful. What made November 18, 2022 different was Tony Miller Jr. The details of what Miller and the woman's relationship had looked like in the period leading up to the shooting, and what specifically had driven Miller to the point of opening fire on a vehicle containing his own daughter, are not laid out in granular detail in the public record of the case. What is established through the trial, the conviction, and the sentencing is that Miller was present at or near his mother's house on East 38th Place that evening, that he had a firearm, and that when the vehicle carrying his ex-girlfriend, William Wilson IV, and his own daughter pulled up, he opened fire on it. William Wilson IV was shot in the head. He was inside the vehicle when the bullet struck him. The woman, sitting nearby, was shot in the arm. She survived. Their daughter, the little girl who was the entire reason they had driven to that house that evening, was in the back seat during the shooting. She was not physically struck by any of the gunfire. She was, however, present. She watched it happen. Miller fled after the shooting. He did not stay at the scene. He did not call for help. He left. Wilson was transported to hospital. He was in critical condition from a gunshot wound to the head. He remained in hospital for 2 days. On November 20th, 2022, William Wilson IV died from his injuries. Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department officers with the Violent Crimes Unit began their investigation immediately. The evidence they gathered moved quickly and pointed directly at Tony Miller Jr. License plate reader data placed Miller's vehicle at or near the scene of the shooting at the time it occurred. Cell phone data corroborated this, placing his phone in the same location during the same window of time. The surviving victim, the woman who had been shot in the arm, identified her ex-boyfriend as the shooter. She told investigators that Tony Miller Jr. had been the one who opened fire on the vehicle. Miller was taken into custody on November 22, 2022, 4 days after the shooting. He was arrested by the Violent Crimes Unit. As the case moved through the Marion County court system, the charge sheet reflected both the murder of William Wilson IV and the attempted murder of the woman who survived. The presence of Miller's daughter in the vehicle at the time of the shooting was a central factor in how prosecutors and the court approached the case. Marion County prosecutor Ryan Mears addressed it directly. A father had created a deadly situation in the direct proximity of his own child, had endangered her life, and had exposed her to lifelong trauma. Mears said the defendant's decision to do this was abhorrent. The trial took place in May 2025 and lasted 2 days. The evidence presented by the prosecution included the license plate reader data, the cell phone data, and the testimony of the surviving victim, who identified Miller as the person who had shot at the car. The case was straightforward in its physical evidence. Miller's movements on the evening of November 18, 2022, had been captured by technology that placed him at the scene. The person sitting in the car when it happened had survived and identified him. After a 2-day trial, Tony Miller Jr. was found guilty of murder and attempted murder. Following the guilty verdict on the primary charges, Miller entered guilty pleas to 2 sentencing enhancements, a habitual offender enhancement and a felony firearm enhancement. These enhancements exist under Indiana law to increase sentences for defendants who have prior felony convictions and who used a firearm in the commission of a crime. By pleading guilty to these enhancements after his conviction at trial, Miller added 15 years to what his base sentence would otherwise have been. Sentencing was held on June 11, 2025, before a Marion County judge. The base sentence on the murder and attempted murder convictions was 90 years. With the habitual offender enhancement and the felony firearm enhancement applied, the total sentence became 105 years in prison. Marion County prosecutor Ryan Mears issued a statement after sentencing. He said that despite the young girl being present at the time of the deadly shooting, Miller had pulled the trigger without any consideration for her safety. He said that Miller had not only endangered her life, but had exposed her to lifelong trauma. He said no child should have to be exposed to that kind of violence, especially at the hands of their own father. 105 years. Tony Miller Jr. was sentenced to 105 years in prison for shooting into a vehicle that contained his own daughter, killing the man she was sitting next to, and shooting and wounding the woman he used to be with. He will not be leaving prison. The sentence is longer than any normal human lifespan from birth. It is, in practical terms, the rest of his life. The daughter who was in that car on November 18, 2022, is growing up without William Wilson IV, who was killed 2 days after being shot in the head while sitting in a parked car waiting to collect her. She is also growing up without her father in her daily life, because her father is now serving 105 years in an Indiana prison. Whatever she carries from that evening on East 38th Place, whatever a child takes away from being present when her father shoots a man sitting next to her mother, she carries it without either of them. The woman who was shot in the arm survived. She identified Miller to police. She sat through a 2-day trial and watched him be convicted. She has lived with November 18, 2022, in a way that no public record can fully capture. William Wilson IV came to pick up a little girl. He had done nothing wrong. He was in a relationship with her mother. He drove to a house on the east side of Indianapolis on an ordinary November evening and was shot in the head before he ever got out of the car. He died 2 days later. He was 30 years old. The cases in this video have covered men who planned for weeks, men who waited for hours, men who lived in the same apartment, men who chased victims through parking lots, and men who sat in the back seat of their own mother's cars. Tony Miller Jr. shot into a vehicle containing his own child because the woman he used to be with had moved on and brought her new partner to a routine custody pickup. 105 years is what a Marion County judge decided that was worth. The number is almost incomprehensible. It is also, in the context of what he did and who was in that car, entirely beside the point. The point is that William Wilson IV is dead. A little girl was in the back seat when it happened, and Tony Miller Jr. made that choice himself. The cases we have covered share a common thread. An ex who could not accept a new relationship, a new partner who paid the price, and a sentence that will define the rest of the perpetrator's life. What every single one of these cases also shares is this: not one of the victims did anything wrong. They were simply people who had moved on, or people who were with someone who had moved on, and that was enough for someone who used to be in that person's life to decide they had to die for it. Idrisa Fall. Just before 1:30 in the morning on July 18, 2021, a 27-year-old woman named Dara Northern walked out of her home in the Petworth neighborhood of Northwest Washington, D.C. She was heading to her best friend's car. The two of them were going out for the night. It was a Sunday. Dara had recently ended her relationship with a man named Idrisa Fall and had asked him to leave her home. He was no longer welcome there. She had made that clear. What she did not know as she stepped outside that morning was that Idrisa Fall was already there. He had followed her out of the building. Within seconds of Dara Northern stepping out of her front door, Fall shot her. She died at the scene. Her best friend was in the car waiting for her when it happened. Idrisa Fall was 37 years old at the time of the shooting. He was arrested, charged with first-degree murder while armed, and tried before a Superior Court jury in Washington, D.C. On January 22, 2025, 3.5 years after the shooting, the jury found him guilty. On May 2, 2025, Fall was sentenced to 50 years in prison by Superior Court Judge Rainey Brandt. Dara Northern was 27 years old. She lived in the Petworth neighborhood of Northwest Washington, D.C., a residential area in the upper part of the city. Beyond her age and her address, the public record of the case does not provide extensive biographical detail about Dara's life, her career, or her background. What the case record establishes is that she had been in a relationship with Idrisa Fall, that she had ended it, that she had asked him to leave her home, and that on the morning of July 18, 2021, she was planning a night out with her best friend. That is what she was doing when she died. She was walking to a car to go out with someone she was close to. She had done everything right. She had ended a relationship she did not want to be in. She had removed the person from her home. She was living her life. Idrisa Fall was 37 years old and lived in the District of Columbia. He and Dara Northern had been in a romantic relationship. At some point before July 18, 2021, Dara ended the relationship and told Fall to leave her home. He had been staying there, and she wanted him gone. He left, or at least, he was no longer living there. But leaving the home and accepting that the relationship was over were two different things for Idrisa Fall. The public record of the case does not detail the full history of their relationship, how long it had lasted, how it had developed, what the specific circumstances of the breakup had been, beyond the fact that Dara had ended it and asked him to go. What the evidence presented at trial established is that Fall had not moved on after leaving her home. He had not accepted that it was finished. And on the night of July 17th, going into the early hours of July 18th, 2021, he was at or near her home in Northwest DC. According to the government's evidence as described by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, Fall followed Dara Northern when she came outside. Just before 1:30 a.m. on July 18, 2021, Dara walked out of her home, heading toward her best friend's car. Fall was behind her. He shot her outside her own home. She died at the scene. Her best friend was in the car. She had been waiting for Dara to come out so they could leave together. What she witnessed instead was her best friend being shot dead feet from the vehicle. Metropolitan Police Department officers responded to the scene in Northwest DC. Dara Northern was found at the scene and was pronounced dead. The investigation that followed identified Idrisa Fall as the shooter. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder while armed, possession of a firearm during a crime of violence, and unlawful possession of a firearm. The charge of first-degree murder while armed in Washington, D.C. requires the government to prove that the killing was deliberate and premeditated, that the defendant thought about it beforehand and made a conscious decision to carry it out. The presence of the firearm and the circumstances of the shooting, Fall following Dara outside and shooting her as she walked to a car, form the basis of the premeditation argument the prosecution would bring to trial. The unlawful possession of a firearm charge indicated that Fall was not legally permitted to have the weapon he used to kill Dara Northern. The case did not go to trial quickly. Between the July 2021 shooting and the trial, more than 3 years passed. The reasons for that timeline are not laid out in the public record available at the time this script was written. What is documented is that the case was prosecuted by Assistant U.S. Attorneys Christian L. Hinson and Yasmin Emrani from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, and that the Metropolitan Police Department led the investigation, with assistance from the U.S. Marshals Service. The trial took place in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia before Judge Rainey Brandt. The jury that heard the case was composed of members of the District of Columbia community who were presented with the government's evidence and the defense's response to it. The core of the government's case was the sequence of events in the early hours of July 18, 2021. Dara Northern had recently broken up with Fall and kicked him out of her home. On the night of the shooting, Fall was present outside or near her home. When she came outside, he followed her and shot her. The evidence that established Fall's presence at the scene, his connection to the weapon used, and the circumstances of the shooting formed the prosecution's argument that this had been a deliberate, premeditated act, not an accident, not a spontaneous moment, but a decision Fall had made. The defense's arguments at trial are not detailed extensively in the public record of the case. What is documented is that the jury deliberated and returned a verdict. On January 22, 2025, the Superior Court jury found Idrisa Fall guilty on all 3 counts. First-degree murder while armed, possession of a firearm during a crime of violence, unlawful possession of a firearm. He had been charged nearly 3.5 years earlier. The jury had now decided, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Idrisa Fall had deliberately and premeditatedly shot and killed Dara Northern outside her home in northwest Washington, D.C., in the early hours of July 18, 2021, because she had ended their relationship and asked him to leave. Sentencing was scheduled and took place on May 2, 2025, before Superior Court Judge Rainey Brandt, the same judge who had presided over the trial. The sentencing was announced publicly by U.S. Attorney Edward R. Martin, Jr. and Metropolitan Police Department Chief Pamela Smith. Judge Rainey Brandt sentenced Idrisa Fall to 50 years in prison. In addition to the prison term, Fall was ordered to serve 5 years of supervised release upon the completion of his sentence. The U.S. Attorney's Office statement announcing the sentence acknowledged the work of the Metropolitan Police Department investigators who had built the case, the U.S. Marshals Service for their assistance, and the support staff within the U.S. Attorney's Office, including investigative analysts, victim and witness advocates, paralegal specialists, and litigation technology specialists who had worked on the case across the more than 3 years between the shooting and the conviction. The specific mention of victim and witness advocates in the U.S. Attorney's announcement points to something that is easy to overlook in cases like this one. Dara Northern had a best friend who was in a car waiting for her when she was shot dead. That person was a witness to the aftermath of what happened. They had been waiting for Dara to come out so they could go out together for the night. Instead, they watched their best friend get shot outside her own front door. Whatever that witness carried away from July 18, 2021, they carried it through the investigation, through the years between the shooting and the trial, and through the trial itself. The case was straightforward in its facts and devastating in its simplicity. Dara Northern had done what people in unwanted relationships are told to do. She ended it. She asked him to leave. She removed him from her home. She was, by every measure, handling the situation the way it is supposed to be handled. She was moving forward. She was going out with her best friend on a Sunday night. Idrisa Fall had left her home, but had not left her life. He was outside it on July 18th, 2021, at 1:30 in the morning, when she stepped outside. He followed her and shot her before she reached the car. There is no complexity in the motive. There is no difficult-to-understand psychological chain of events that requires lengthy unpacking. Dara Northern left him. He killed her for it. The location of the shooting, outside her own home, steps from her front door as she walked toward a car, underlines something that comes up repeatedly in cases of this kind. The most dangerous moment for someone leaving a relationship with a person who cannot accept it is not some distant future moment. It is often the period immediately following the end of the relationship, when the person who has been left is still processing what has happened and still present in the life of the person who left them. Dara Northern had taken the step of removing Fall from her home. She had created physical separation. What she could not have known was that the separation she had created did not extend to the space between her front door and her best friend's car. 50 years. Idrisa Fall was 37 years old when he shot Dara Northern. He was sentenced at 41. He will be in his 90s before he completes his sentence. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, which prosecuted the case, operates under federal oversight and handles some of the most serious criminal cases in the nation's capital. The sentence of 50 years handed down by Judge Rainey Brandt on May 2, 2025, reflects the court's assessment of what Idrisa Fall did outside that home in northwest Washington, D.C., in the early hours of a Sunday morning in July 2021. Dara Northern was 27 years old. She had ended a relationship. She had asked the person to leave. She had plans for the night. Her best friend was in the car. She walked out her front door and did not make it to the car. The cases covered in this video span different states, different years, different methods, and different circumstances. Some involved custody exchanges. Some involved stalking that went on for months. Some involved men who drove from other cities, men who waited outside for hours, men who lived in the same apartment, men who chased victims through parking lots. Idrisa Fall did none of those things in the elaborate, documented ways that some of the other men in this video did. He was simply there, outside her home, at 1:30 in the morning when she came out, and he shot her. The simplicity of it is part of what makes it so difficult to process. There was no elaborate plan laid out across weeks of surveillance. There was no folder of photographs on a laptop. There was no 3-hour wait in a parked car. There was a woman who walked out of her front door, and a man who had been asked to leave her life, and had not truly done so. And in the space between those two things, Dara Northern died. She was going out for the night with her best friend. She never made it to the car. Idrisa Fall will be in his 90s before he is scheduled to complete his sentence. He was convicted on January 22, 2025, and sentenced on May 2, 2025, by a court in the city where he shot a 27-year-old woman outside her own home because she had ended their relationship. The 10 cases covered in this video are 10 different people, 10 different locations, 10 different sets of circumstances. What runs through all of them without exception is the same thing. A relationship ended. The person who had been left could not accept it, and someone who had every right to move on paid for that with their life. In some of these cases, it was the new partner who paid. In Dara Northern's case, it was Dara herself, shot before she even reached the car, before the night she had planned with her best friend had a chance to begin. She had done everything right. Make sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.